Alright guys, so I'm breaking up the notes into parts. So this part is going to cover the nervous system and what you need to know for that quiz. So the first notes on nervous system, Lab 15. What would happen if acetylcholine was released in a synaptic cleft to bind to its receptor on a muscle fiber but not broken down? And again, what it's basically asking is what happens when acetylcholine, the chemical messenger that gives permission for contraction, keeps being released and not being broken down. It's kind of like somebody who keeps sending you the same text over and over again. It keeps setting off your phone, right? They keep sending you the same text, and your phone gets keeps ringing. So when muscle cells keep receiving acetylcholine as a chemical messenger, what happens is that the muscle stays in a constant state of contraction. It keeps getting the same message, so the muscle is constantly staying contracted. It's not given a chance to relax. So anytime acetylcholine is released and the muscle has done its job, has contracted for whatever task it was needed for, the acetylcholine needs to be broken down so that the muscle can relax. Right? So we don't want to keep acetylcholine in play. Otherwise, it keeps our muscles in specifically our skeletal muscles in a constant state of contraction. Now, here we have divisions of the nervous system. Some of the things the nervous system should be able to do: sensory input, integrating information, meaning make sense of information, control muscles and glands. Maintain homeostasis, establish mental activity, and make sense of our environment. So there's a chart here for the nervous system that I want you guys to be very familiar with. It first breaks down the nervous system into the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. And what that means is the central nervous system is our brain and spinal cord, right? Any nerve tissue protected by bone, that is considered part of the central nervous system. Then you have the peripheral nervous system. These are the nervous tissue that extend outside the brain and spinal cord. Now follow that breakdown of the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral meaning to the side. The peripheral nervous system breaks down into the sensory and motor division. So sensory, those are our senses, right? Sight, sound, taste, touch, etc. Right? Any information, right, we get from the world, it comes through our senses. Our senses pick up information, and then that information from our senses, it goes to the central nervous system. It goes to the brain and spinal cord, where it's prioritized, evaluated, made sense of, right? And then depending on the information that's given from our senses, our motor division is used to respond to it. And so if you look at the motor division or motor neurons, they break down into the somatic and autonomic. Somatic refers to our skeletal muscles, our voluntary movements. Our autonomic refers to our involuntary movements, right? So the autonomic division controls, say, our heart and digestive organs. And then the autonomic division, it breaks down into the sympathetic and parasympathetic division: fight or flight, rest, and digestion. I always like to compare the nervous system to a sort of cell phone, right? The sensory division is where you get incoming calls, right? And when you get an incoming call, your phone should tell you who's calling, right? Because that information from your senses should go to your brain and spinal cord, and your brain and spinal cord should have a memory of what your senses are telling them. They should have some sort of awareness of what it is. And based on who's calling you, right, you can decide if you want to pick up or not. You can decide how you want to pick up, whether you want to respond through a text or tell them you'll call them back. With today's cell phones, you can respond in a number of ways. So again, incoming calls would be your sensory division. They go to your brain and spinal cord and make sense of it. And then the brain and spinal cord uses the motor division to respond appropriately, right? So be aware of that breakdown of the nervous system and what falls under what. Neurons and neuroglia. So, nervous tissue comes in two types. You have the neurons and neuroglia. Neurons are amitotic, highly metabolic, and live long. Now, what does it mean that neurons are amitotic? It means that they do not go through cell division. They don't go through mitosis. How do we know that? Well, certain cells in our body, they can regenerate very quickly. If somebody, accidentally cuts me on my arm, at least in a week or so, that cut will be healed, right? But if I were to get a head injury, maybe from a car accident, how many people come back from a head injury, right? It's because neurons, they don't regenerate often. Neurons, they transmit impulses from one part of the body to another, and there are three parts to a neuron that you want to be aware of. There's the cell body. That's typically where the DNA is found. It's the receptive part of a typical nerve cell. The other parts of a neuron are the dendrites, right? They usually receive information, and the axons usually generate the outgoing response. They usually generate the impulse, right? They send away information. So the dendrites receive information, or they take information to the nerve, and the axons send out the impulse or response from the nerve. Where does the action potential start from on an axon? It starts from something called the axon hillock, although I never even asked questions about it. And the next table talks about afferent versus efferent. Afferent is another word for sensory. Efferent is another word for motor, right? Afferent meaning incoming information, efferent meaning outgoing response. And now we go into the neuroglia. You want to know the neuroglia for the next quiz. So neuroglia, what does it mean? It means neurons plus glue. What do they do? They primarily support and surround neurons. They usually retain the ability to go through cell division, while neurons do not. There's 6 types of neuroglia, but we're only going to address 5. So in that table on your notes for Lab 15, nervous system, I outline the major neuroglia you want to know. And notice in that table, right, where are most of the neuroglia found? They're mostly found in the central nervous system, the CNS. So most of these neuroglia, they're supporting the neurons of your brain and spinal cord, the CNS. Then you have another neuroglia that supports the PNS. It supports the nerves of the peripheral nervous system, right? So be familiar with that. Astrocytes are the most abundant neuroglia. Microglials play a defensive role. Ependymal, they nourish the central nervous system with cerebral spinal fluid, CSF. And the oligodendrocytes provide a myelin sheath that helps to insulate neurons, right? And Schwann cells, they also provide a myelin sheath, but they insulate nerves of the PNS. So be mindful of that, right? What part of the nervous system are these neuroglia found, and what do these neuroglia do? What's the role that they provide? Especially in the case of myelin sheath, right? Any neuroglia that provides myelin sheath, they insulate parts of a neuron. The same way that, for example, if you look at an extension cord, they're covered in insulation so that there's no electrical accidents, right? Well, without these myelin sheath, we'll have sort of electrical accidents in our body, in our head. If you ever heard of the condition multiple sclerosis, MS, that happens because the myelin sheath around neurons is wearing or degrading away, and a person ends up with all these ailments, right? So be mindful of that. So I'm gonna just reiterate: be sure to know the divisions of the nervous system, right? Know the divisions, and know the neuroglia. All right.